I was 32 when I met Larry. He was 35, quiet, a little shy, and not exactly the kind of guy I thought I'd end up with, but he had this sweet, steady energy that made me feel secure. At that point in my life, security sounded like the magic word. I had just come out of a chaotic, messy relationship with someone who made me feel like I was constantly on a roller coaster. Larry, on the other hand, was stable, dependable, and financially secure. He worked as a manager for a logistics company, and while it wasn't anything flashy, it paid the bills, and he took his work seriously. He wasn't the most exciting guy in the room, but he was consistent. Looking back, I think that's what I found most attractive. He wasn't going to run off or do something reckless. We moved fast. Within a year of dating, we got married. Honestly, I was tired of waiting for my life to start, and Larry seemed like the perfect person to settle down with. We got a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town, and for a while, everything felt like it was falling into place. I worked as a receptionist at a dental office, which wasn't my dream job or anything, but it was easy and paid decently. Larry and I settled into a routine: movie nights on Fridays, brunch with his mom on Sundays, and lazy Saturdays spent running errands or just lying on the couch watching whatever was trending on Netflix. At first, I thought I had everything I wanted. Larry was attentive, always asking about my day and trying to make me happy. On my birthday, he planned this whole elaborate dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. He wasn't flashy or showy, but he put in the effort, and that mattered. I wasn't used to that. My exes had always been more about the big gestures to impress me, but Larry's thoughtfulness felt real, even if it was quieter. But, if I'm being honest, there were things about Larry that I just ignored in the beginning, because I wanted to make it work. For one, he wasn't great socially. He could hold his own in small groups, but in bigger settings, like when we went to one of my friends' engagement parties, he'd get awkward and stick to the sidelines. He wasn't super funny or charming, and sometimes I felt like I had to do the heavy lifting to make conversations flow when we were around other people. I chalked it up to him being introverted, but part of me also felt embarrassed. I'd see other couples at these gatherings, the guys cracking jokes, being the life of the party, and I'd think, why can't Larry be more like that? Money wasn't an issue, at least not at first. Larry was practical, always budgeting and planning for the future. He wasn't cheap, but he wasn't exactly spontaneous with spending either. I, on the other hand, liked to enjoy life. If I saw a cute bag online or wanted to splurge on a weekend trip with friends, I didn't see the harm in it. Larry would raise an eyebrow sometimes, but he never said much. I think he didn't want to rock the boat. In hindsight, I realized that maybe he should have pushed back more. But at the time, I appreciated that he didn't try to control me. Things started to shift after the first couple of years. Larry got a promotion at work, which meant longer hours and more stress. He'd come home tired, and instead of asking about my day like he used to, he'd just plop down on the couch and turn on some boring sports channel. I told myself he was just adjusting to his new role, but it felt like something had changed. He wasn't as present as he used to be, and I started to feel lonely, even though we lived under the same roof. I tried to bring it up a few times, but Larry would always brush it off, saying he was doing all this for us, to build a better future. And maybe he was, but in the process, it felt like the us part of the equation was getting lost. I started spending more time on my own, scrolling through Instagram, hanging out with my girlfriends, or just zoning out with my favorite reality shows. Larry didn't seem to notice or care. At the same time, little things about him that I used to overlook started to bother me. The way he dressed, always plain and practical, like he didn't care about making an effort. The way he'd order the same boring meal every time we went out, like he was afraid to try something new. Even the way he laughed. This weird, awkward chuckle that I once found endearing but now just grated on my nerves. It wasn't like he'd changed. He was the same Larry he'd always been. But I had started to see him differently, and I couldn't unsee it. Then there were the times we'd go out in public, and I'd catch myself cringing at the way he carried himself. He wasn't rude or anything, but he didn't have that effortless confidence that I admired in other men. He'd fumble over his words when talking to a server, or get flustered when someone bumped into him in the grocery store. I hated how annoyed it made me, but I couldn't help it. It felt like I was constantly comparing him to some imaginary ideal in my head, and he kept falling short. Looking back, I think that's when the cracks in our relationship really started to form. It wasn't one big thing, just a million tiny moments where I felt like I was settling. I didn't say anything to Larry because, honestly, I didn't know how to. He was still the same sweet, steady guy I married, and I didn't want to come off as ungrateful. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I'd rushed into this. Maybe I'd convinced myself I wanted this kind of life because it seemed safe and practical, but now that I had it, it didn't feel like enough. That's the thing about relationships. They can look perfect from the outside, but inside, they're way more complicated. Larry and I had built this life together that seemed solid, but underneath, there were cracks forming. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it, or if I even wanted to. Larry started working later and later, and when he did get home, he was either too tired to talk or too distracted by his phone to really engage with me. He'd scroll through emails or read articles about work-related stuff while I was trying to tell him about my day. I remember sitting there sometimes, staring at him and wondering if he even realized how distant he'd become. It was like I was living with a stranger who just happened to share my bed. To be fair, I didn't exactly try to bridge the gap either. Instead of talking to Larry about how I was feeling, I started spending more time out of the house. I'd go out for drinks with my coworkers after work, or meet up with my best friend, Haley, for coffee on weekends. Haley was single, and always had some wild story about her latest Tinder date or drama with her ex, and honestly, her life seemed way more exciting than mine. I started to envy her freedom, the way she could just do whatever she wanted without having to think about someone else. Meanwhile, at home, things with Larry became even more routine, almost robotic. He'd wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, and zone out in front of the TV until it was time to go to bed. On weekends, we'd run errands together, but it wasn't like we were spending quality time. It was more like we were just checking things off a list: groceries, laundry, oil change for the car. There was no spark, no excitement, nothing that made me look forward to spending time with him. The worst part was that Larry didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. I'd try to drop hints, saying things like, "We never go out anymore," or, "Do you even want to spend time with me?" But he'd just shrug it off or say something vague like, "We've both been busy." I started to wonder if he was as bored with me as I was with him, but he never said anything outright. That was the thing about Larry. He avoided conflict at all costs, even if it meant ignoring the obvious. Around this time, I started getting more active on social media. It started out innocently enough, posting pictures of my coffee runs, liking my friends' vacation photos, and sharing memes. But then I started getting more attention than I expected, especially from guys. It was never anything overtly inappropriate, but there were compliments and flirty comments that made me feel noticed. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that feeling. Larry used to compliment me all the time when we first got together, but now it felt like he barely looked at me. I'd spend hours scrolling through Instagram, comparing my life to the highlight reels of other people. There were girls my age traveling to exotic places, buying cute outfits, and going on fun dates with guys who seemed way more exciting than Larry. I started to feel like I was missing out, like I'd settled for this safe, predictable life when I could have had something better. Of course, I didn't say any of this to Larry. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and honestly, I wasn't sure he'd even understand. The tension between us started to show in little ways. I'd get annoyed with Larry over the dumbest things, like the way he chewed his food too loudly, or how he always left his socks on the floor instead of putting them in the hamper. One night, I snapped at him because he bought the wrong brand of laundry detergent, and instead of arguing back, he just apologized and walked away. That only made me angrier. It felt like he didn't care enough to fight for anything. Not even me. At the same time, I started to pull away from him emotionally. When he'd ask me how my day was, I'd give him short, generic answers, like "it was fine," or "nothing special." I didn't want to open up to him anymore because it felt pointless. He wasn't really listening anyway. I started keeping things to myself, things I would have shared with him in the past, Instead, I vented to Haley or posted vague, cryptic quotes on Facebook about feeling unappreciated or misunderstood. Larry never commented on them, which just made me feel even more invisible. I also started noticing things about Larry that I hadn't paid attention to before. Or maybe I'd just been ignoring them. Like how he never seemed to have any ambition beyond his job. He was content to stay in his middle management role and collect a steady paycheck. But I wanted more than that. I wanted a partner who dreamed big and wasn't afraid to take risks. Larry was the complete opposite. Practical to a fault and terrified of anything that might disrupt our carefully planned lives. And then there was his appearance. I know it sounds shallow, but Larry had let himself go a bit since we got married. He'd always been on the heavier side, but now he seemed to have stopped caring altogether. He'd come home from work, change into an old pair of sweatpants and a ratty t-shirt, and just lounge around like that for the rest of the night. It was hard to feel attracted to him when he didn't even try to look good for me, or for himself. I'd drop hints, like suggesting we go to the gym together or try out a new diet, but Larry would just laugh it off and say he was fine the way he was. I didn't realize it at the time, but all of these little things were building up inside me, creating this growing resentment that I couldn't shake. It wasn't like Larry had done anything wrong. He wasn't cheating on me or treating me badly. But he wasn't exactly making me feel loved or valued either. I started to feel trapped, like I was stuck in a life that wasn't really mine. The funny thing is, if you'd asked me back then, I would have said Larry was the one who'd changed. But looking back, I think I was the one who'd started to pull away first. I wanted more than what we had, but I didn't know how to ask for it, or even if I deserved it. Instead, I let the distance grow between us, hoping he'd notice and do something about it. But Larry didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything, and that only made me feel more alone. The night everything shifted was like any other ordinary evening. Larry had come home late from work again, looking drained, while I was already halfway through a bottle of cheap wine I'd picked up earlier that day. I wasn't drunk, but I was definitely buzzed enough to let my filter slip. We hadn't had dinner together in weeks, so I ordered takeout for both of us and was scrolling through Instagram while he sat across from me at the table, eating quietly. I don't even remember how it started, but I was messaging Haley about some meme she'd sent me, laughing under my breath. Larry looked up from his food and asked what was so funny. Nothing, I said dismissively and went back to my phone. I could feel him watching me, but I ignored him. After a few minutes, he sighed and went back to eating. That's when I said it. I didn't mean for him to hear it, but I muttered under my breath, "God, it's embarrassing to be around you sometimes." The words slipped out before I could stop them. They weren't meant for him. I was thinking out loud, caught up in my own frustrations, but Larry heard every word. He froze mid-bite, staring at me like I just slapped him. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. I panicked. "Nothing," I said quickly, trying to brush it off. But the damage was already done. He put his fork down and leaned back in his chair, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, some mix of hurt and anger. "No," he said, his voice still calm, but with an edge. "You said I'm embarrassing to be around. Is that really how you feel?" I tried to backpedal. "I didn't mean it like that," I said, waving my hand dismissively. It just slipped out. "Don't take it so seriously." But the look on his face told me he wasn't buying it. "Wow," he said after a long pause. "I mean, I knew you'd been distant lately, but I didn't realize you felt that way about me." His voice cracked a little at the end, and for the first time in a long time, I saw how much my words had hurt him, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt defensive. "Well, maybe if you tried a little harder, I wouldn't feel that way," I snapped. The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't stop. "You've let yourself go, Larry. You don't even try to be fun or exciting anymore. All you care about is work and sitting on the couch. It's like you've just given up." The room went silent. Larry stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he was processing everything I just said. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks for being honest, I guess." He got up from the table, threw his half-eaten dinner in the trash, and went into the bedroom without another word. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty chair across from me. Part of me felt bad for what I'd said, but another part of me felt justified. It wasn't like I was lying. Larry had let himself go, and I was embarrassed sometimes. But maybe I shouldn't have said it out loud. I thought about going to apologize, but instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and stayed on the couch scrolling through my phone. The next morning, Larry was up before me, which was unusual for a weekend. I found him in the kitchen, drinking coffee and scrolling through his laptop. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "About last night." "Don't worry about it," he cut me off without looking up. "You were right, I need to make some changes." I wasn't expecting that. Usually, Larry would either avoid the issue entirely or try to smooth things over with some half-hearted apology. This time, he didn't seem interested in either. I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Over the next few days, Larry barely spoke to me. He went to work, came home, and kept to himself. He didn't ask about my day or try to make small talk like he usually did. At first, I told myself he was just processing everything, but as the days turned into weeks, I started to get annoyed. I hated being ignored, especially by someone who was supposed to love me. I tried to bring it up a few times, but Larry would just say he was tired or didn't feel like talking. One night, I finally snapped. "Are we just not going to talk anymore?" I asked him while he was brushing his teeth. He looked at me through the mirror, his expression unreadable. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Anything. Just talk to me. You've been acting weird ever since that night." "Maybe because you called me embarrassing," he said bluntly, turning to face me. "I mean, what do you expect, Jenna? For me to just forget about it and act like everything's fine?" I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to apologize, but another part of me felt like he was overreacting. It wasn't like I'd meant to hurt him. Besides, it wasn't my fault he'd taken it so personally. Instead of apologizing, I said, "Well, maybe if you acted less embarrassing, I wouldn't have said it." As soon as the words were out of my mouth, I regretted them. Larry didn't say anything. He just shook his head and walked away. That was the night I realized something had shifted between us. Something that might not be fixable. Larry wasn't the type to hold grudges, but this felt different. It wasn't just a fight. It was like a crack had opened up in our relationship, and neither of us knew how to close it. After that night, things between us changed for good. Larry wasn't just distant anymore. He was cold. He stopped trying to make small talk or ask about my day, and when I asked about his, he'd give me short, clipped answers like, "Fine," or "Same as always." It was like I was living with a stranger. Someone who looked like my husband, but didn't act like him anymore. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself he'd get over it eventually. Larry wasn't the kind of guy to hold on to grudges, and I figured he just needed time to cool down. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear this wasn't something he was going to just get over. He'd come home from work and head straight to the bedroom or his laptop, barely acknowledging me. The silence in our apartment was suffocating. I tried to bring it up a few times, but every conversation ended the same way, with Larry shutting me down. "What do you want me to say, Jenna?" he'd ask, his tone flat. "You've made it pretty clear how you feel about me." That comment stung more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't used to Larry being this blunt or this angry. He'd always been the calm one in our relationship, the one who smoothed things over when I got worked up. But now it felt like he'd given up on trying. One Saturday, I suggested we go out for dinner, thinking maybe we just needed some time away from the apartment to reset. Larry hesitated for a moment, then agreed. I thought it was a good sign, that maybe he was ready to move past what happened. But the night was a disaster. He barely talked to me during the meal, and when I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, he just gave me a forced smile and went back to his food. It was painfully clear he didn't want to be there. By the time we got home, I was so frustrated I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you seriously going to act like this forever?" I snapped as we walked through the door. "I get it, Larry, I hurt your feelings, but can you stop punishing me for one stupid comment?" I said I was sorry. He turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "No, Jenna," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You didn't say you were sorry. You've never apologized. Not once. That stopped me in my tracks. Had I really not apologized? In my head, I felt like I had. But when I thought about it, I realized he was right. I'd made excuses, tried to justify what I said, but I'd never actually said the words, "I'm sorry." Instead of owning up to it, I doubled down. "Well, maybe I didn't say it, but I didn't mean it like that. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's not like I said you're a bad person or something." Larry shook his head, looking more defeated than angry now. "It's not just about what you said, Jenna. It's about how you've been treating me for months. You don't respect me. You don't even like me. Not really. I'm just here." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was, I couldn't. Deep down, I knew there was some truth to what he was saying. I had been treating him differently. I had been pulling away, but instead of admitting that, I said, "That's not true. You're overthinking it. You always do this, make everything into a bigger deal than it really is." That was the end of the conversation. Larry didn't say another word. He just grabbed his keys and left the apartment. I didn't know where he went, and honestly, I didn't care. I was too angry to care. Over the next few weeks, Larry started spending more and more time away from home. He'd come back late at night, long after I'd gone to bed, and leave early in the morning without saying a word. At first, I thought maybe he was just staying late at work, but then I noticed he wasn't wearing his usual work clothes. One night, I saw him leaving the apartment in jeans and a button-up shirt I hadn't seen him wear in years. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Out," he said without looking at me. "With who?" "Does it matter?" he shot back, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. I didn't press him further, but the conversation left me spiraling. Was he seeing someone else? The thought hadn't even crossed my mind until that moment, but once it did, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started checking his social media for clues, but Larry barely posted anything. I even went through his phone one night while he was in the shower, but I didn't find anything suspicious. Still, the paranoia lingered. At the same time, I started noticing changes in him. He was dressing better, taking more care with his appearance. He'd been going to the gym, and it showed. He looked leaner, more confident. It was like he was becoming a different person, someone I barely recognized. And the worst part was, I couldn't tell if he was doing it for himself or for someone else. I tried to distract myself by throwing myself into my own life. I started going out more with Haley, posting more on Instagram, and even flirting a little with some of the guys who slid into my DMs. It wasn't serious, just harmless fun. But it made me feel better, like I still had options. If Larry wanted to pull away, fine, two could play that game. But no matter how much I tried to act like I didn't care, the truth was, I did. Larry wasn't just pulling away physically. He was pulling away emotionally, too. And for the first time, I started to realize that maybe I'd pushed him too far. Maybe he was done trying to make things work. One night, I overheard him talking on the phone in the other room. I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but I caught enough to know he was talking to someone about me. "I don't know if this is fixable," he said quietly. "I've tried, but she doesn't seem to care. I can't keep doing this." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to storm into the room and demand to know who he was talking to, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, replaying his words over and over in my head. For the first time, I started to wonder if Larry was really done. And if he was, I didn't know what I was going to do about it. It was a Tuesday evening when Larry came home earlier than usual, which immediately put me on edge. Normally, he didn't walk through the door until after 7, but today, it wasn't even 5:30. He looked serious, his face set in that calm, determined way that always made me nervous, because it meant he'd made up his mind about something. He didn't say much, just dropped his bag by the door and went to the kitchen to pour himself a glass of water. I followed him, trying to gauge his mood. "You're home early," I said, keeping my tone light. He nodded, sipping his water, but didn't say anything. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He set his glass down on the counter and finally looked at me. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words sent a chill down my spine. "Okay," I said, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding. "What's going on?" Larry sighed and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. I've been thinking a lot about us, he started, and I knew immediately this wasn't going to end well. And I don't think this is working anymore. I froze, my stomach dropping like I'd just missed a step on the stairs. What do you mean, not working? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Jenna, I can't keep doing this. I've tried to make things better, I really have. But you don't seem to want to fix this. You don't even seem to care. That's not true, I snapped, my voice rising. You're the one who's been pulling away, not me. How am I supposed to fix something when you won't even talk to me? Larry shook his head. I tried talking to you, Jenna, over and over again, but every time I do, you either dismiss me or blame me for everything. I can't keep being the only one who's trying. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words got caught in my throat. Part of me knew he was right. I had been dismissive, and I had blamed him for things that weren't entirely his fault. But hearing him say it out loud felt like a slap in the face. So what are you saying? I asked, my voice trembling. You're just giving up? I'm saying I think we need some time apart, he said, his tone firm but calm. I've already found a place. I'm moving out this weekend. The room started to spin. You already found a place? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. How long have you been planning this? A while, he admitted, avoiding my gaze. I didn't want to make any rash decisions, but I think this is the right thing to do. For both of us. For both of us, I snapped, my anger flaring up. Don't pretend like you're doing this for me, Larry. You're doing this because you're too much of a coward to fix what's broken. Larry's expression didn't change. Maybe, he said quietly, but at least I'm doing something. I can't just sit here pretending everything's fine when it's not. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to do anything to make him change his mind. But deep down, I knew this was coming. I'd seen the signs for weeks, maybe even months. I just didn't think he'd actually go through with it. Fine, I said, crossing my arms. Go ahead and leave. See if I care. Larry gave me a long, hard look, like he was searching for something, maybe a reason to stay. But whatever he was looking for, he didn't find it. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room. The next few days were a blur. Larry packed up his things methodically, barely speaking to me as he moved around the apartment. I tried to act like I didn't care, but every time he carried another box out the door, it felt like he was taking a piece of me with him. By the time Saturday rolled around, the apartment felt empty, even though most of the furniture was still there. The morning he left, I tried one last time to change his mind. Larry, don't do this, I said, blocking the door as he carried his last box out. We can fix this. We just need to try harder. He sighed, setting the box down and looking at me with those sad, tired eyes I used to love so much. I've been trying, Jenna, for a long time, but I can't do it alone. You're not doing it alone, I argued. I'm here, aren't I? Physically, yeah, he said. But emotionally, you've been checked out for months. I don't even know if you like me anymore, let alone love me. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't know how to respond. Did I love him? Of course I did, didn't I? Or maybe I just loved the idea of him, the stability and security he represented. But the man standing in front of me now, packing up his life and walking away, wasn't the man I fell in love with. Or maybe he was, and I just never really seen him for who he was. I don't want this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't want this either, Larry said, his voice soft but resolute. But I think it's what we need. And with that, he picked up the box, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty doorway. Part of me wanted to chase after him, to beg him to stay. But another part of me, the part I didn't want to admit existed, felt relieved. I hated that feeling, but I couldn't shake it. Maybe Larry was right. Maybe this was for the best. The first few days after Larry left felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, and I hated it. I'd never realized how much noise he brought into my life, whether it was the sound of him typing on his laptop or the way he hummed to himself while making coffee. Without him, the silence was deafening. At first, I tried to fill the void by keeping myself busy. I went out with Haley more often, stayed late at work, and even started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned years ago, like yoga and baking. But no matter how much I distracted myself, the weight of what had happened was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying our last conversation over and over again. Part of me wanted to call him, to tell him I'd changed my mind and that we could fix things if we just tried harder. But every time I picked up the phone, something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or fear that he'd tell me it was too late. Either way, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. Instead, I threw myself into social media. I started posting more pictures, carefully curated to make it look like I was thriving. Selfies with Haley, photos of my meals, and vague, inspirational quotes about new beginnings and finding yourself. The likes and comments gave me a temporary high, but it never lasted. As soon as I'd put my phone down, I'd feel just as empty as before. Meanwhile, Larry seemed to be doing just fine without me. I couldn't help but stalk his social media, even though I told myself I shouldn't. He didn't post much, but when he did, it was always something that made my stomach twist. A picture of him hiking with some coworkers, a check-in at a trendy restaurant I'd always wanted to try, or a photo of him looking happier and healthier than I'd ever seen him. He was thriving, and I hated it. One night, I saw a post that stopped me in my tracks. It was a picture of Larry at a small gathering, sitting next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was pretty, too pretty, and they looked way too comfortable together. My heart sank as I stared at the photo, analyzing every detail. Was she the reason he'd been so distant? Had he moved on already? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't stop obsessing over it. I texted Haley immediately, venting about how unfair it was that Larry was out there living his best life while I was stuck feeling miserable. "He doesn't even look like he cares," I wrote, "like I never even mattered." Haley, ever the blunt one, replied, "Well, did you act like he mattered? Maybe this is what he needed to be happy." Her words stung, but I couldn't deny there was some truth to them. Larry hadn't left out of nowhere. He'd been unhappy for a long time, and I hadn't done much to help. If anything, I'd pushed him further away. But admitting that felt like admitting I was the villain in my own story, and I wasn't ready for that. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I'd messed up. I started going back through old photos of us, reliving the early days of our relationship when things were good. Back then, I'd been happy. Really happy. So what had changed? Had Larry changed, or had I? The more I thought about it, the more I realized it was probably me. I'd gotten so caught up in my own frustrations and insecurities that I'd stopped seeing him for who he really was. I'd stopped appreciating him. But recognizing that didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made me feel worse. Because now it was too late. Larry was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I didn't even know how to live without him. A few weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. It was the first time I'd seen him since he moved out, and I wasn't prepared for it. He looked good, really good. He'd lost weight, gotten a haircut, and was wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. I, on the other hand, was in sweatpants and no makeup, clutching a basket of frozen dinners like some kind of cliché. "Hey," he said when he saw me, his voice calm and polite. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile. We made small talk for a few minutes. How's work? How's Haley? That kind of thing. It was awkward but civil, and for a moment I almost let myself believe we could go back to being friends. But then he said, "I hope you're doing okay, Jenna." "I really do." There was something final in the way he said it, like he'd already made peace with the fact that we were over. And that's when it hit me. Larry wasn't coming back. He'd moved on, and I was still stuck in the past, clinging to something that wasn't there anymore. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Thanks," I said quietly. "You too." As I watched him walk away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, regret, and maybe even a little relief. Because for the first time I realized that as much as I wanted to blame Larry for everything that went wrong, a lot of it was on me. I wasn't the victim in this story, no matter how much I wanted to be. I'd made choices, and those choices had consequences. In the weeks that followed, I started to focus on myself, not in the superficial way I had before, but in a real, meaningful way. I started therapy, something Larry had suggested years ago, but I'd always brushed off. I reconnected with old friends I drifted away from, people who reminded me of who I used to be, before I got so caught up in trying to be someone I wasn't. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened with Larry. Maybe a part of me will always wonder what could have been if I'd just tried harder, been more honest, or appreciated him more. But for now, I'm just trying to take things one day at a time. It's not easy, but it's a start. And maybe that's enough.